Speaking of a fair day's pay for a fair day's work, there was a debate that happened on the Storm Huntley programme with a Conservative MP and Owen Jones about whether or not companies should have to share their profits with workers, which of course they should. Those are the ones who generated the profit because they're the ones who did the labour, so they absolutely should be. But I'm sure Dana Davison will be absolutely gobsmacked at the idea that we should be thinking of the shareholders instead. So let's have a listen.
Now I want your calls on this. Should companies be forced to share their profits with the workers? Bakery giant Greggs have decided to give a share of their windfall to staff this year to recognise their hard work and effort. Now, the high street chain racked up a record annual profit last year, and about 25,000 workers will get a slice of the bonus pie in their next paycheck.
I'm glad that all of those steak bakes went to a good cause.
But should all businesses be made to do this? 0207 862 2222 is the number to give us a ring with your thoughts. Deanna, good news, good idea?
I think it's a lovely story, and I think if I were to run a really successful business, I would want to give back to the workers that had helped make that happen. But the question is, should we force companies to do that? No, we shouldn't. Ultimately, this is a private decision for a private business, and how they want to conduct their business is their matter. You would think that a good business would want to reward their workers anyway, but I think we need to actually get out of the way, put less restrictions on business, let them do their thing, let them make profit. I think in this country,
The fact that we have MPs elected to Parliament who don't know the difference between less and fewer, bit of a personal gripe there. But again, it's like, oh, it should be a free decision to be made. I'm like, well, then very few of them will do it. Do you think the shareholders are going to be happy with that unless it's like an LLC? Why would they do it? Especially if it was a looser labour market where you wouldn't even be chasing staff members, which of course is the Conservative Party's supply-side labour market reform plan, and has been, to disempower workers to bargain for better wages and for better conditions. But of course, you look at, for example, the Communication Workers Union in their dispute with Royal Mail, one of their concessions with Royal Mail was profit sharing. So if you join a trade union, you can get a collective bargaining agreement, which does include sharing profits with workers. So even if you don't force the company to do so using the state, you can also collectively bargain for those profit sharing as well.
we've got kind of terrified of saying that people wanting to make profit is a good thing. There is nothing wrong with that. There is nothing people should feel guilty about for wanting to make profit. And ultimately,
I mean, profit is bad. Profit is stolen wages of the working class. Because if it was a cooperatively owned, everyone would share the profits between themselves and collectively decide how to distribute those profits, rather than one person who has all the capital, who buys the labour power, who has all of the power, being the single person who decides how that money gets spent, or indeed the shareholders who have not put anything into the business. They just own shares, and therefore the ones who are then reaping the benefits of the labour of those at the bottom of the pile.
It's making the economy a better, more vibrant place, which is making the pie better for everybody.
But this is allowing staff to earn a profit too, which is surely even better. And it sounds lovely. Companies aren't doing it though. So in order to make companies nicer places, maybe the government has to step in.
But I don't think we should be restricting businesses and forcing them to do anything. A good business will do the right thing. And as I say, if I were running a business, I'd like to think I'd be doing the same thing for my workers. But there's nothing wrong with the private individual running a business and choosing how they spend their own profits.
Well, we've seen how that approach has worked. In 1965, the average CEO had a pay 21 times greater than the typical worker there. It is now 344 times higher. Now, workers create the wealth in society through their hard graft, through their hands or through their brains. No company can work without them. They create the wealth in society. And what we've seen in Britain over the last now, getting over 2 lost decades of living standards, the longest squeeze in people's pay since the early 19th century. The average person now the average worker is worse off now than they were when the Conservatives came to power. That's what happens if you let businesses just do what they want. The main problem, I would say, is because we've got weak trade unions. If you look at places like Scandinavia, Sweden, Finland, they have much stronger trade unions, and workers have more pay and better living standards, because what trade unions do is give workers strength to say, actually, we're the ones propping up your business, we're making the cash, we're making the profit for you, you wouldn't be rich without us, which we know, because if we withdraw our labour, your business won't work anymore. So we should have a fairer share of the wealth that is created.
I hear what you're saying.
I mean, he's 100% correct here. He's 100% correct. Capital on its own produces nothing, but labour can produce without capital. Which is just who owns the capital, who decides where things get distributed, which is why I favour the Schweikart model of a market economy of worker cooperatives, because then all the profit is always being done democratically. It's always being shared with the people who put the labour in, rather than people who do no work but do have money, capitalists themselves, who cream off the top of the people who actually do the work and actually create the wealth.
Our unions aren't as strong as they were, say, in the late 70s. However, that's because people aren't really joining them. They're weakened by government policy, but they have also been weakened by their numbers.
Well, you're right.
That's people just don't want to be part of a union.
Well,
Why is that?
Well, we've got the strongest anti-trade union laws in the Western world. No other Western country has more stringent anti-union laws than we do. That makes it, for example, very hard for them to organise in the workplace. You're right, there's actually challenges. For example, it used to be the case that people, for example, might have worked in a mine or a factory all their life. People now often shift jobs quite a lot. That makes it quite hard to organise. But the truth is, the collapse in union membership, which was a lot to do with the anti-union laws, has meant that workers' pay, it's one of the main reasons workers' pay has stagnated, or fallen actually in real terms, over the last few years. That's bad actually for the business and economy, because if you put money in the pockets of those at the top, they tend to save it. They put it in offshore tax havens and so on. Low-paid workers, you put money in their pocket, they go and spend it, and that's good for local businesses.
They can spend it and they might be more productive, and
What's also important as well on this one specifically is with regard to the drop in trade union membership. Of course, loads of people left the trade unions at the moment where they were kneecapped by all of this aggressive anti-union legislation. But because we had no unions for a long period and their strength was so low, the way in which we got employed changed. We've had the recent advent of the casualized gig economy, the independent contractor, people working off of apps who literally are just people who do nothing, the people who own those apps, right? Uber take a 25% cut out of the taxi driver's pay. What do they get it for? Owning a bank of servers somewhere? That's literally it. That's proper rentier capitalism. And this new form of work is only possible in a country where you have very few trade union laws. It's why it's so prevalent over here and over here and over in the United States. And why, cooperatives have tried to fill that void. A drivers' cooperative in New York is set up. And I highly recommend people go and check it out. Because why would you? What's the point in having these things owned by a capitalist? All it does is suck money out of those who actually spend it on buying commodities, as Owen specifically says, rather than taking that money and using it for stock buybacks or pouring the liquidity into asset prices.
Two ways in order to grow the economy, something that we desperately need, particularly at the moment. So maybe, Deanna, this is actually somewhere where the government, although you don't like people making laws on businesses or constraining businesses, maybe this is somewhere that it has to happen.
Well, I already think we have really kind of over-regulated business as it is. It's right that we have regulations on things like, environmental and working conditions. I think that's really important. But ultimately, some of the most successful economies in the world actually have pretty deregulated businesses that can get on and do business without over-government interference. On the point of trade unions, a genuine question, this isn't me trying to get a gotcha moment, but do you think there is a point whereby people are not joining the trade unions because the leadership seems to be overly politicised and interested too much in issues that don't necessarily directly affect their work, and they'll be, on panel shows talking about stuff that isn't actually impacting their own work?
I don't think so. I think the main...
Maybe that could have theoretically have been true ages ago, but when have we seen trade union leaders in the news recently where it's been a big media event? It's Mick Lynch. And when is he on TV? When he's talking about bargaining for better trade union rights, about the plight of workers in our society, about the problems of inequality in our society, all the billionaires that we have. Outside of that, when else have you seen people just like some Twitter clip of somebody at a Palestine Solidarity Campaign march? It's mostly videos of Mick Lynch bodying journalists over the crappy economy that we have for working people at the moment and the gargantuan levels of inequality we have in a country with more billionaires than ever. I don't think that this is right, what she's saying here. And obviously she said it was a genuine question, so I'm genuinely answering.
The main problem is the media don't report on what the biggest democratic movement in the country does. It's over 6 million workers in trade unions. That's lower than it was, but it's still a huge number of people. And what often happens is the media don't take an interest in what trade unions do on a daily basis. If you actually look at what trade union officials are doing, they're not doing politicking, they're organising in workplaces. If you look, for example, at the moment, Unite, Sharon Graham, she doesn't actually talk about the Labour Party at all. And what she does is focus, her whole approach is using what she calls leverage to get companies to, for example, increase pay for their workers.
But then
that's what she focuses on.
But then you do get the guys like Mick Lynch, who are big characters and very highly politically driven. Which
very
I think,
successful.
Which I also think puts off a lot of people from wanting to get in any way involved in the union.
But I think...
he's politically driven on talking about the issues of how workers are treated in our economy. Yeah, that's a political issue. Like, I can't believe trade unions would be political. Yeah, of course they're talking about politics. The work environment is politics. Legislating on our labour market is politics. Like, how is that? How are trade unions not political? It's just a silly statement for her to make.
That's
as well.
that's a bad example for what you're arguing, because in the rail industry and the transport industry, because he represents rail transport and rail, maritime and transport sectors, they have very high levels of union membership. And that's because they have a strong leadership that actually achieves things, because they've just won a victory.
And a leadership, and how much does it wind up people watching at home who are literally unable to get to work when there are these ridiculous levels of strikes for train drivers that are on 65 grand a year plus?
People support
we've
support those strikes, and that's because actually most of their workers are earning like £20,000 to £30,000.
We've deviated on unions here, but let's get
Yeah, because the trade union leader who represents the train drivers is Mick Whelan from ASLEF, not Mick Lynch from the RMT. Don't know how many times we've had to make this bloody distinction.
back to the chat here. Do you think staff should share in the profits of a company? Stuart, what's your thoughts?
Hi. Well, my thoughts are more or less aligned with Owen's, that, this government should realise that, as Margaret Thatcher thought she got rid of the unions in the 80s, the unions have actually got rid of this government effectively, because they haven't looked after working people and their wages. And I don't think it should be left really to sort of companies to decide whether to throw a few more extra crumbs to its workforce. So my thoughts are: invest in your unions, join your union, and secure a decent wage that way. And then you won't need to be hoping for
some of the profits.
True.
Interesting. I'll throw that to Deanna. What do you say to Stuart?
I just kind of, when you extrapolate that and kind of take it up the chain, I wonder how that would work in practice. Like, let's say we had a beautifully kind of idealistic regime whereby any bit of profit had to be shared out completely amongst the workers fairly. It's not going to work, because there would be no incentive to do business. There would be no incentive to start a business, to hire people, because ultimately...
It's true. In the half a century that we had, or almost half a century, that we had the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, where we had broadly cooperative ownership throughout the economy, nothing happened. No businesses ever existed throughout the entirety of the existence of Yugoslavia. And that is, quite frankly, all the evidence I need to know that profit sharing just doesn't work. Yeah, clear case. It's a miracle that it lasted for 45 years long. It's almost like, actually, that's not true. And there were plenty of incentives, because when you're the worker coming to the cooperative factory, the remuneration and the incentive to produce is the extra remuneration that you get in your wages. If you're getting paid a set wage, you're incentivized to put as little work as possible that you need to, based upon that remuneration. If you're getting active feedback in terms of extra bonus by doing better because you have a share in the profits, you're directly incentivized to work as hard as possible. So it actually generates more productivity that way, and that's shown in the Unlearning Economics video about worker democracy.
A lot of people who start business are driven because they want to make profit. They want to build a better life for them, for their families. As their businesses grow, they employ more people. That drive would go if you had to share out every single penny with your workers.
It is an interesting concept when you look at companies with shareholders, for example. If you're going to invest in a company and put money in, are you going to put money in the company that you know that when they make really good profits are going to give most of that to their staff and you're going to see none of it? Or are you going to invest your most money in a company that is going to give you the kickback that you're looking for?
Almost like shareholder capitalism is dumb, and we should have cooperative ownership instead. Instead of allowing a bunch of people who do no work, who have no engagement with the business whatsoever, but just happen to own the shares, giving them dividend payouts from the work that the workers do, which they have no ownership of, we should get rid of that system altogether and replace it with social ownership, or cooperative ownership. Just spitballing here. Now, won't somebody please think of the shareholders?
Well, I'm not looking at shareholders and how they're doing. I'm looking at the actual people that are doing the work.
I know, Stuart, but the shareholders are the money people. They're the ones that are going to invest. Do we want to see more investment is what I'm asking. And if we want to see
working people can invest collectively.
More investment, maybe this isn't the right approach.
Well, maybe the shareholders need to realise also that a satisfied workforce and a job satisfaction is as important to a company as perhaps the increase in shares they might get. Maybe it's a bit more sort of long-term thinking that's needed. And you know, to answer the question of the Tory MP,
Oh,
do
well,
we really need the ratios to keep increasing at the rate that they have between management and workforce?
sorry. Okay, I thought you were going to go
And
with
just
something
the
else.
point there, Dana, that in terms of, I mean, firstly, I'd actually want workers-owned companies, and then you would actually have them distribute the profits, and that would be an incentive, because then the harder they work, the more profits they would be shared amongst the workers. But in any case, with Greggs, they still make profits. They shared some of it
And it was
with the
only
workers.
it was also only 10%, so it
Exactly.
wasn't all of the profit, obviously.
But the other point is, when
It's
you
like, it's like a tiny minority of the profits as well. I mean, that's basically the kind of profit sharing or shared ownership that you would have gotten from John McDonnell's inclusive ownership funds, right? The inclusive ownership funds are for people who were working in big businesses. They would have 10% of their shares be redirected towards the workforce in like the biggest social ownership program that the country's seen since 1945.
But it's bad. If you look around the country now, there are many towns that are really struggling, and actually their hearts were ripped out of them when industries collapsed. That was never rebuilt. A lot of the problem is because people aren't paid properly, they can't spend properly in their local communities. If workers are paid more, that's good for local businesses.
But that's an argument to increase the wage rather than give them a kickback on profits. It would be easier to manage your money if you were given more money on a regular basis rather than just
But it also would, like say, the incentive is there to then be more productive.
a bonus.
And also, if I may, I think a lot of the towns that are seeing a revival from that kind of post-original industrial phase are seeing it because of international investment. And if we have an economy where it is perceived around the world that we have over-restriction on businesses, it is less likely we're going to get that international investment here in Britain that will create the good, high-skilled, high-quality jobs that can revitalise towns and parts of the world like Teesside, which has done really well from global investment.
Sweden are doing much better than us in terms of their living standards. But I think, by the way, another way around this, and actually this is, you know, people have suggested this, I think it's a really good idea, is you give workers automatically in every business, say 5%, 10% of the shares, and then you
I don't know how much the shares are, but John Lewis are definitely doing some sort of very similar.
Well, that's a
thing.
cooperative.
So there are companies that are absolutely getting involved with this sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a co-op.
But then Mexico's got it enshrined in law, which is an interesting way of doing it. And that's interesting. I suppose we've got some messages coming in. So sweet people online are saying, thank you very much for your call, Terry. It's something I hadn't thought about. Mark on X says it could help staff retention and incentivise increased productivity as well. Why should just the CEO, directors and shareholders benefit from the profitability of the company?
True.
Anne on X says, I totally agree that the workforce should be rewarded for their commitment and loyalty when it comes to getting a bonus. It's all tax deductible anyway, so it can benefit both. Well, that's interesting. That actually puts a sort of different angle on it, why Greg's...
I mean, literally every single person that they've brought up here, maybe this is selection bias going on here, but it's interesting that literally everybody here is agreeing with us and agreeing with Owen.
might be doing it as well. But this is all very, very interesting. We'll see what other companies follow suit on this. But I bet you Greg's staff are very happy with what's been happening.
See, the thing is, what's crazy about this is that the inclusive ownership funds are not part of the current Labour platform. Obviously, they're not under Sir Keith, right, obviously. But they can't even justify it by saying that, well, there's not enough money, because it's not a policy that requires state spending to engage in, to make sure that shares can get transferred to the workers of the company. The only justification, essentially, for it is it would make our donors sad. We're being donated to by private capital and private equity. Private equity literally are the shareholders. Private equity firms are the ones who make money by doing nothing, by just buying shares and then making dividends and profits off of those share values. Like, that is who is profiting in private equity terms from having the shareholder version of capitalism that we have currently. So yeah, of course, the Labour Party that's funded by private equity isn't going to change the rules of worker ownership, which would thereby make less money for private equity. That's the only reason that they're not doing it, because it wouldn't cost them too much money to do it otherwise. And that's what you get when you become beholden to corporate interests. The chat, looking forwards to this incredibly mediocre Labour Party being in power for donkey's years. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership to just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.